Tilt shift photography is a pretty cool technique that allows you to make things like people and cars look much smaller, as if they're macro subjects. And of course, we're used to macro subjects and making them much bigger. What if you could do both with the same lens? Today, we're trying out the Laowa 55mm f2.8 tilt shift macro lens. Stick around and I'll explain more in just a sec. Hi guys, I'm Ben from Adaptalux and welcome back to another photography tutorial where today we're doing something very different, something I've not done before, and that is tilt shift photography. But we're also going to be doing some macro photography and we're going to be doing both with the same lens. The lens in question is this beast just here. This is the brand new 55mm f2.8 tilt shift macro lens from Laowa. So this is a 1x macro lens, but it's also got tilt shift capabilities, which you can see in this section just here. There's all sorts of knobs and dials and things for changing the position of the camera relative to the lens. Now that's really important when it comes to tilt shift photography. We're literally tilting the lens, tilting the camera on the lens so that we're offsetting the depth of field and making things look artificially very blurry in the background and the foreground. That's what gives that sort of toy-like effect in landscape photos. So I'm going to be trying out some tilt shift photography, and I'm going to be putting this lens through its paces for some macro photography as well. And I'm pretty sure that this is going to be a really interesting exploration of this brand new lens. So then guys, first things first, let's take a look around this lens because it does look, well, it's a bit of a behemoth. It's quite a large lens for a 55mm lens. However, it does have all of these knobs and dials and potentially quite intimidating features on the lens. Starting at the front here, we've got a focusing ring, which is, well, it's pretty standard, and then we've got an aperture ring as well. We do have an attachment for a tripod down here, which is really handy because this lens is also quite heavy. I've been attaching my camera to the tripod using the lens rather than using my quick release plate here, and this does have an Arca Swiss attachment on it as well, so that is really handy. So let's take a look at the tilt shift capability of this lens. This section here is what does the magic tilting. So using this dial just here, I can offset the angle of the lens. I can go both upwards and downwards, and the dial that you're seeing facing the camera there, this one locks it in place, so that is just a resistance dial just there. I also have a dial on the top here which will allow me to offset the camera. So if I find that I framed things up and then actually want to shift my view a little bit off to the side, I can do that really effectively using this little dial just here. There's a little button on the side just here which also allows you to tilt the camera. So if you're attached to your tripod and you decide that you want a portrait image instead, you can press that little button and slide your camera around to a different angle. Really handy for changing your perspective, but also absolutely essential for changing the plane of your focus, because this lens only tilts upwards or downwards. If you find that you need to change your plane of focus in a different angle, then you can do that by changing the angle of the camera on the lens itself. So it's not all as intimidating as it seems. You just have to get used to having a few extra controls on your lens. Now let's take this outside and see what kinds of tilt shift capabilities it actually has. So of course, usually here on the channel we're doing quite a lot of macro photography, and we will come to the macro capabilities of this lens in a little while, but taking it out and about, it's really really fun to play around with. There's a few things with tilt shift photography that I picked up very, very quickly. The first is choosing where your narrow plane of focus goes is quite critical. You want some action, some movement in your image as well, and I think some frame of reference on how large stuff should be is quite handy. So if you're taking pictures of perhaps trees or natural subjects, then you don't necessarily know how large those are supposed to be. Whereas if you're taking photos of people and cars and buildings, then people generally have an idea of what they're supposed to look like, and having everything look much smaller is quite novel. Raising your position off the ground is also really helpful. For tilt shift photography, we're trying to replicate that feeling of macro photography, and usually when a macro photographer is taking a photo of a subject or a scene or perhaps a model village of some sort, the angle that that photograph would be taken from is much higher. So getting up to a second or third story of a building and looking down on the scene replicates that angle of a much larger photographer standing over the subject. I think this just adds to the effect. It's not absolutely necessary, but trying to find an elevated position where you can look down onto people and cars and streets certainly adds to that novel toy-like effect. The last thing that I tried out with my tilt shift photography, which I'm sure you can tell, is that the footage is sped up ever so slightly. I'm not sure why this has a psychological effect on making everything seem smaller, but everything being sped up by 2 or 3 times certainly adds to that whimsical toy-like effect. Now, of course, you can take both stills and video with a lens like this. I just prefer all of this video just for that, the motion, the action that's going on, and of course, you're watching a video, so it's much more interesting to see things moving. Now, on my way home, there was a live act playing in one of the pubs, so I stopped and tried it out with a little bit of portraiture. This wasn't using any of the tilt shift capabilities. I literally just pointed it at the singer, and it did a surprisingly good job of also taking some good portraits. So this lens really can be a bit of an all-rounder. If you want to take it out for the day, you can find yourself doing all sorts of different types of shots. And that brings me on to the second capability of the lens, and that is that it's a 1x macro lens. So then, guys, I've just set up a little Lego scene here because I thought we've been taking pictures of real-sized people and making them look small. Why not make some small people look a little bit bigger? So we've got some Lego in the background here. This is from the shelf behind me. You'll recognize that, but it's just to give the background a little bit of color and variance. And then we have this Lego Dungeons and Dragons minifigure here. It's a tiefling firing some magic out of her hands. And I've added some Adaptalux Studio lighting here as well to give the scene a little bit of extra light and a little bit of extra color. So we've got a lighting arm over here. This has a purple color filter on the end of it, which you can see shining off my hands there. We've got a green color filter on a white lighting arm back here, just to give the background a little bit more color, and then a white lighting arm at the front here, so that we've got some nice white light on the side of her face. So all of that is coming together for a nice little scene here, but what we're looking at is the lens. So this lens is now at maximum magnification, so this is 1:1. We're getting nice and close to the minifigure's face there. But what do all of these dials do in macro? Well, let's take a look first of all at that main feature, the tilt shift capability. So if I tilt this lens down, well, you can see that not a whole lot changes, which is really interesting. I don't know whether that's simply because of the scale that we're looking at. The change is so minute that it's really imperceptible, or perhaps it's just not capable of doing tilt shift at macro level. Perhaps that's just not a thing. But what is really interesting is this side-to-side movement. So if I change this dial just here, you can see that I can actually shift my scene off to the sides without using my lens, which is a very handy feature for macro. So instead of having to move your whole setup and point your camera in a different direction just to reframe your scene, what you can actually do is just move that the camera attached to the lens. Now we can also do this, so we can swap the camera perspective really easily, and we're now in portrait, and then I can do the same thing, so I can reframe my image to focus well, just on the character there, or over here onto the magical whatever it is, the thing coming out of her hand. So that's a really quick and easy way to make adjustments to your image just by manipulating the attachment point of the lens. The lens itself is, well, it's looking pretty sharp to me. It's looking pretty good on the focus side of things. It's a nice big focusing ring here, so plenty of space to get your grip on the lens and find your focus. And it is nicely attached down to my focus stacking rail just here, mounted by the lens itself. So it's a nicely balanced lens. Although it's quite bulky, although it's quite heavy, it is nicely balanced. So you're not going to get any tipping as you move your focusing rail forwards and backwards. Unlike if you mounted this using the camera, the weight of the lens would pull it down as you move things forwards and back. So I'm going to take this shot, and I think we've got quite a nice macro shot of our Lego minifigure. So although this is actually quite a fast lens at f2.8, I don't really want to be shooting with the lens wide open, so that extra lighting is really important. If you're here for macro photography and want to know more about this lighting and some Lego photography, I will link up in the top right-hand corner of your screen to a dedicated video on Lego macro photography using an equally interesting Laowa lens, the probe lens, which is very good for getting inside buildings. I don't know how Laowa keep coming up with these strange concepts for lenses, but they're certainly very cool and very fun to play around with. So what do I think to this strange and very unique lens? Well, it's definitely a very fun lens to have in your arsenal. It's actually surprisingly versatile. You don't have to use it for macro on its own or tilt shift on its own. You can use it for a whole range of things and have that tilt shift capability in your back pocket. It's very close. I did notice that despite it being a 55mm lens, it's actually got quite a lot of zoom to it, and trying to get a landscape with this might be a little bit tricky, but also it's quite handy that it's close up, because if you do go up into higher floors on buildings, then you want to zoom in a little bit and get some of those details of the people walking around. The tilt shift might be my new obsession. It's a really fun type of photography to go out and do, especially if you just enjoy dawdling around town and finding some interesting things to photograph or to film. Adding some tilt shift to the mix, it really adds to that sort of warming, nice, outdoorsy, going for a walk type vibe that you want from a nice day's photography. Add to that the fact that it can do macro photography as well, and this is a pretty good all-rounder lens for me. I'm maybe thinking of replacing my normal 100mm macro lens with this. That's only a 1x magnification lens as well, so if I'm just doing 1x magnification or anything close to it, I think this might be the way to go, simply for all of those additional adjustments that you can make to your image after you set everything up on the camera. The one downside I can find with this lens, it is quite large, quite bulky, quite heavy. So if you only have a small camera bag or you want to travel lightweight, perhaps it's not for you. But I think the trade-off between some extra weight and some extra bulk and having extra capabilities all in one lens is definitely worth it. It's certainly a very unique looking lens as well, so if you have photographer friends, they're almost certainly going to want to borrow it and play around with it, but I'd keep it to yourself just so that you can have a little edge on everyone else that can't do tilt shift photography. This lens is brand new. I think it comes out today actually, so I will link down in the description to the Laowa product page so you can go and have a look at this lens. It comes in both 55mm and 100mm, so depending on what you might want, you can get some different focal lengths. This one is the 55mm. Everything that you've seen today has been filmed on this lens using well, some extra lighting from ourselves and a Sony a7 III. So if you have a hankering for something brand new, I can highly recommend this lens to go and try some tilt shift photography while still having a handy macro lens in your camera bag. Let me know what you think to my first excursion into tilt shift photography and the little extra macro photography that we did on the side there. And do make sure to subscribe for lots more macro photography tutorials, ideas and inspiration coming in the future. For now, that is all I've got time for. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.